It started with the knock, not a loud one, just a soft, practiced tap at the glass door of the conference room, the kind that says we've already decided. I looked up, adjusted the collar of my blouse, and nodded. The HR director stepped in first, clipboard in hand, eyes avoiding mine. Behind him, Martin, my boss, or soon-to-be former boss, if I was right. He looked like he hadn't slept. Good. They asked me to sit, as if I hadn't been here before, as if I hadn't spent the last 4 months watching them move pieces on a board they thought I couldn't see. I folded my hands neatly in my lap. I even smiled. Just a little. Elise, this isn't easy. That's how they always start, as if difficulty makes betrayal noble. He continued, spewing corporate phrases like restructure, streamlining, realignment of innovation priorities. I waited for the part where they pretended I'd be missed. It didn't come. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I asked for the severance paperwork. That rattled them. I was supposed to fight, to panic, to beg for clarity. But I had seen this coming long before they did. You see, Martin had a tell. Every time he lied, he blinked twice in quick succession, like his eyes were trying to outrun the truth. He'd been blinking like a metronome for months. They thought I'd been too busy coding to notice the shifting meeting invites, the deleted messages, the quiet erasure of my authorship from slide decks, but I had already built something they didn't know about. And unlike them, I wasn't arrogant enough to believe my silence meant stupidity. I stood when they finished, thanked them, and as I stepped out of the conference room, I handed Martin a flash drive. You'll need this to keep the product stable, I said. He blinked, twice. He didn't know it yet, but what I gave him wasn't the latest version. It was a fossil, a carefully preserved relic of what the algorithm used to be before I took it home, cleaned its bones, and taught it how to fly. I walked out of that building like I was headed to lunch, calm, precise. Inside, I could already hear the first cracks forming in their glass tower, but I didn't stop to listen. I had a meeting to prepare for. That night, I sat across from a man they hated. Darius Hahn was the CEO of our competitor, a sleek and sharp tech firm that our execs referred to as the parasite. I liked parasites. They only latch onto the weak. Darius didn't waste time. He pulled out the agreement, slid it across the table, and waited. I read every word slowly, letting each clause hit the air with weight. Exclusive licensing rights to my new patent. Full ownership retained under my name. A 7-figure signing bonus. Relocation package for my team. And an actual seat on the executive board. I signed. Not because I wanted revenge, but because it was mine. They had tried to erase me, and I had written myself into a new book. Darius raised his glass. To new beginnings, I didn't clink, just nodded. When I left the restaurant, the city felt different, like the air had recalibrated, like something quiet and dangerous had just slipped into motion. The next day, I showed up to the office one last time, packed my things, smiled at the receptionist, left behind perfect documentation, just like a good soldier. They still thought I'd go quietly, but by 3 p.m., TechSlate News broke the story Elise Tran joins Hantech. Licensing game-changing IP, the email flood started seconds later. Martin's first message was just a question mark. I didn't reply. By the time the second article dropped, Hantech acquires exclusive rights to Breakthrough Predictive Engine, my old company's Slack channels had become digital bonfires. I didn't need access to know Word spreads faster in tech than in any other industry, especially when panic is involved. Martin's second email came with a desperate subject line, "Call me urgently." Still, I didn't reply. Instead, I watched from a quiet co-working lounge across town, sipping black coffee and reading every word as the press did what it does best: inflate, speculate, and, most importantly, expose. They were digging into patent records, connecting my name to filings from 6 months ago. The filings they never saw? The filings I submitted from my personal attorney's office on a quiet Friday night after they postponed my promotion for the third time. My team, those who stayed loyal, who saw the writing on the wall when I did, had already received their offers. Darius didn't just sign the paperwork, he welcomed them, matched their salaries, doubled their options, sent relocation specialists within hours. The transition was seamless, calculated. They didn't hesitate. You'd be amazed how quickly people jump ship when the captain starts hiding lifeboats. I had named the new product Kepler, after the astronomer who saw hidden patterns in the chaos. It was poetic, in a way. They'd tried to bury me in their orbit. I rewrote gravity. Martin finally called my lawyer. That's when the tone shifted. No longer a request, now a negotiation. He wanted a licensing deal. Claimed the core logic in Kepler was built on collaborative assets, which was his sterile way of saying, "We're about to drown, and you're holding the lifeline." My legal team didn't blink. They sent over terms so brutal they read like vengeance in bullet points: full attribution, ongoing royalties, no right to alter the code, and a public apology published in 3 major industry journals, drafted by me, signed by him. They accepted? Of course they did. Their stock had dropped 8 points overnight. I didn't read the apology when it published. I didn't need to. What mattered was the byline Elise Tran, chief architect. What mattered was that every search for their product now led to me. And what mattered most was what came next. The keynote. I never liked speaking in public. I always preferred code to conversation. But this was different. This wasn't about presentation. This was about permanence. The lights in the auditorium dimmed. My name echoed over the sound system. I stepped out, not as someone seeking recognition, but as someone who already had it. The applause was immediate, a rising tide, but I didn't smile. Not yet. I began with the story of Kepler, not as a revenge tale, but as a case study. How innovation dies in silence. How voices are erased in the margins. How power isn't always loud, it's sometimes built in the quiet hours when no one's watching. The room didn't move. Not once. And when I ended, no pitch, no product plug, just a single line. Silence is not surrender. It is strategy. They stood. Not for me, but for every woman in tech who's been told to wait her turn while her work is passed off as someone else's. Later that night, I received a short message from a junior developer I barely remembered mentoring. It read, "I stayed because of you. I left because of what they did to you. I'm building something now. Thank you." I stared at that message longer than I stared at any headline. Because that's what legacy actually is. Not the noise, the echoes. The chaos back at my old company wasn't sudden, it was metastatic. Like a cancer that had been growing in secret, only now realizing it was terminal. They tried to keep things together with emergency meetings, external PR firms, even rushed rollouts of half-baked features. But nothing could patch the silence I left behind. Because I wasn't just the mind behind the product. I was its soul. And they had treated me like scaffolding. Departments started hemorrhaging talent. First the engineers, then the UI team. Then even their head of growth, someone who'd spent 2 years pretending not to see what was happening to me, resigned quietly and posted a single line on LinkedIn Build, with people who remember who built it. Recruiters called me in waves, investors sent cautious feelers, even my competitors, the ones who used to ignore my emails, now referenced my work in panel discussions. The thing they feared most wasn't that I'd spoken out, it was that I hadn't. Silence lets people imagine the worst. And the worst, in this case, was the truth. Then came the call. Not from Martin. He was already gone, pushed out under the guise of strategic transition. No. This one came from the new CEO, a woman named Catherine, who had been CFO during my final year. I remembered her well, clinical, numbers focused, always neutral. She wasn't cruel, just calculated. The kind of person who never rocks the boat unless it's already sinking. She asked for a meeting. I said no. She offered a dinner. I declined. Finally, she requested 10 minutes, just to acknowledge what should have never happened. I gave her 3. She arrived on time, alone, holding nothing but a notebook and a bottle of wine I once mentioned I liked during a rare team dinner. Years ago. A small gesture. Too late. She apologized. It wasn't performative. It wasn't even elaborate. Just direct. We failed you. And we paid for it. And we will keep paying. I didn't nod. I didn't speak. Because her words weren't meant for forgiveness. They were meant for her own inventory. She handed me the notebook. Inside were handwritten messages. From old teammates, from interns, from people who left quietly or stayed too long. Messages like, I wish I had backed you when it mattered. I used your prototype to teach myself. You changed my path. They feared you because they couldn't control you. I closed the notebook without reacting. Then I handed it back. She looked confused. You don't want it? No, I said. I already carry those words. There was nothing else to say. I watched her leave with the same careful steps I once used to tiptoe around boardroom egos. And in that moment, I felt nothing. Not pride, not rage, just stillness. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers. The real power isn't in being feared. It's in being remembered without begging to be. That night, I walked alone through the city, past the buildings where I once built ideas no one believed in, past the windows where I used to see my reflection and wonder if I was doing enough. Now I knew. It wasn't about doing enough. It was about being enough and daring not to apologize for it. A year passed, not quietly, but not loudly either. The kind of year where everything changes in increments, where headlines come and go, but the work remains. Where you wake up one day and realize that you no longer think about the people who tried to erase you, you just build without them. We launched 3 new products, each one more elegant, more essential than the last. The market responded the way markets do when they recognize inevitability. The numbers shifted, the investors recalibrated. My old company. Their stock never recovered. Their quarterly reports now read like confessionals, long-winded excuses wrapped in financial jargon. I never named them in interviews, never pointed fingers. I didn't need to. Every success I claimed was a reminder of what they lost. Darius, my so-called rival turned ally, once asked me why I never gloated. Why I never went on a podcast or wrote a memoir or gave them the public humiliation they so richly deserved. I told him the truth. They're not the story. I am, because when you've been silenced for long enough, you learn that the loudest revenge is building something undeniable. Something they can't take, can't edit, can't watermark with their names. It's funny people still ask if I miss it. The old company, the familiar halls, the energy. What they really mean is, do I miss being needed? But they never needed me. They needed my silence, and I gave them that until I didn't. Now, I sit in meetings where no one interrupts me. I lead teams where credit isn't currency, it's shared oxygen. I mentor women who were once told they were too ambitious, or not collaborative enough, or not the right fit for leadership. I don't tell them to speak louder. I teach them to listen better to the voice inside that knows when it's time to stop justifying and start moving. There's a photo on my new office wall. It's not of a launch, or a team dinner, or a boardroom victory. It's a still frame from my keynote the exact second I looked up and saw the standing ovation. My face is unreadable. Not proud, not surprised, just calm. Because I wasn't performing. I was reclaiming. The final piece of this, my quiet legacy, came in the form of a letter. Handwritten. No return address. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakable. It was from Mark. Not Martin. Mark. One of the first developers I ever mentored. The one who used to sit in the back, asking all the questions that didn't fit into meeting agendas. He had stayed behind when I left. I thought he'd lost faith. But the letter told a different story. He wrote, "I stayed because I didn't know how to leave. I watched you walk away without burning the place down. And I realized that was power. I'm ready now." Enclosed was his resignation. He had started his own company, small, scrappy, but brave, and he asked if I'd consider being an advisor. I didn't hesitate. Sometimes the best revenge isn't payback, it's passing the torch. There's a kind of silence that feels like suffocation. That was the silence I lived in for years when I watched credit for my work get rerouted. When my voice was filtered through meetings led by men who couldn't write a single line of code, but knew how to perform authority. That silence wasn't peace. It was suppression. But now, I've found another kind. The silence of arrival. It's not flashy. It doesn't announce itself. It's the hush in the room when you walk in and no one questions why you're at the head of the table. It's the absence of doubt when you speak and no one needs a second opinion. It's the quiet in your mind when you finally stop asking, "Did I do enough?" and start asking, "What can I build next?" At Handtech, we don't chase disruption anymore. We design clarity. We build systems that serve, not systems that exploit. My new team knows that innovation isn't just invention, it's discipline. It's not about being the first to shout. It's about being the last to compromise. Once, during a board review, one of the investors, a sharp, older woman with decades of battle behind her, pulled me aside and said, "You lead like someone who's already won." I smiled and replied, "I lead like someone who remembers losing." Because that's the truth, isn't it? We don't rise from nowhere. We rise from being overlooked, dismissed, discarded, and every scar becomes a sensor. Every dismissal, a warning signal. But we don't build empires from bitterness. We build them from precision. I keep a folder in my desk drawer, not digital, physical. Handwritten notes, clippings, letters. Not all are kind. Some are brutally honest. Some are from people who once tried to erase me and later realized they'd failed. I don't read them often, but I keep them. Not as trophies, as timestamps. Reminders of who I was before I learned that vengeance is a sprint. But justice is a marathon. I never screamed, never slammed doors, never leaked memos or staged dramatic exits. I just moved forward quietly and completely. Until one day, I looked up and realized I wasn't behind anymore. I was ahead. By more than numbers, by legacy, by integrity, by the calm certainty that I never needed to win loudly to win completely. So now, when people ask me for advice, young founders, women in rooms stacked against them, even ex-colleagues who've tasted their own wake-up calls, I don't give them bullet points. I tell them a story about a knock at the door, a seat at a table I didn't fight to keep, a product stolen, a name reclaimed, and a silence that turned into thunder. The most unexpected part of power is how ordinary it feels once it's yours. Not in the sense that it's dull, but in how natural it becomes. Like breath, like gravity, like truth. When you've spent years clawing for recognition, you imagine the moment of arrival will be fireworks parades, press releases, applause. But the real arrival, it's when no one doubts your place anymore. When your presence is assumed, not questioned, not challenged, just understood. That shift didn't happen all at once. It built slowly, with every meeting where no one interrupted, with every email that opened with your insight is needed, with every investor pitch that centered my vision, not someone else's translation of it. One afternoon, we hosted a cross-company summit, dozens of execs, engineers, founders from all over the world. It was the kind of event I used to dread, back when I had to fight for time on the stage. This time, I opened the day, no slides, no script, just a chair, a spotlight, and a story. I told them about the day I walked into that final meeting at my old company, the one where they restructured me out of the narrative. I told them what it felt like to be erased by people who praised you in public, but planned your exit in private. And then I told them what I built afterward. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. By the end, the silence in the room was its own kind of standing ovation. Still. Sharp. Awake. Afterward, a young woman approached me, hands shaking slightly. She looked like someone who hadn't yet learned how to shrink. She asked, "How did you not scream?" I looked her in the eye and said, "Because screaming would have made it about them." She nodded. She understood. There's a difference between rage and precision, between reaction and design. I didn't win because I struck back. I won because I built forward. Later that evening, I went back to the office alone. I sat in the conference room, the one with the full skyline view, and turned off the lights. Just me. Just the dark. Just the hum of what we'd created. No fireworks. No applause. Just the sound of a legacy taking root outside the window. I could see the outline of my former employer's building. It looked smaller now, not because it had changed, but because I had. The irony is, I never set out to win. Not like this. I just wanted space to build, to breathe, to think without defending every thought. I didn't need to be celebrated. I just didn't want to be dismissed. But when you deny someone room to grow, they find space elsewhere. And when that space is theirs, truly theirs, they don't come back. Not out of spite, out of evolution. A few months ago, I received an anonymous package. No note, no sender. Inside a framed photo, it was a snapshot of me, years ago, in the lab, bent over my workstation, headphones on, sleeves rolled, completely absorbed. Back then, I didn't know someone had taken that picture. I was just doing the thing I loved, blind to the politics moving around me like sharks under glass. Taped to the back was a single sentence. Typed, centered. "You were always the whole system?" I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just set it on the shelf across from my desk. where it catches the morning light. Because they were right. The product didn't work because of the infrastructure. It worked because of me. Because I saw what no one else did. Because I listened to problems no one thought were solvable. Because I didn't ask permission to care more than the budget allowed. And when they tried to phase me out, they didn't understand what they were cutting. It wasn't a role. It was the engine. Now, when press interviews ask about leadership, I don't mention disruption or scale or investor confidence. I talk about architecture, the kind you build inside people, the kind that endures after betrayal, the kind that doesn't need vindication because its very existence is the answer. Recently, I was invited back to speak at my alma mater. The department that once told me technical roles may not be the best fit now lists my name on a fellowship. I stood in front of a room of students who looked at me the way I used to look at anyone who had made it out intact. And I told them the one thing I never heard when I needed it most. You don't have to get louder to be heard. You just have to build something they can't ignore. I left to a line of thank yous, of hopeful eyes, of whispered confessions from young women tired of explaining why they belonged. And as I stepped into the night, there was no fanfare, just a quiet certainty that what I had done mattered. Not because it shook the earth, but because it settled something inside the people who'd been waiting for permission to begin. There's a term in programming, elegant failure. It means when a system crashes, it does so gracefully. It doesn't break the whole architecture. It simply stops, informs, and exits with integrity. No damage, no chaos, just quiet truth. That's how my departure from the old company should have been handled. But they couldn't even fail properly. They scrambled, tried to patch over the holes with new hires, borrowed ideas, outdated frameworks. But it wasn't about the code. It was never just about the code. It was about trust, energy, vision, the unspoken architecture no org chart can map. After Martin resigned, their interim CTO tried to pick up where I left off. He reached out once, sent a long, cold email about technical lineage and mutual interests. I archived it without reading the second paragraph. You don't reply to the past. You build the future. And the future was humming loud, vibrant, unstoppable. One of our new platforms went viral. Not because we launched it with fanfare, but because it solved a problem no one else had dared to touch. It was messy, invisible work, exactly the kind of work they used to say wasn't strategic enough to invest in. Now, the industry was chasing our shadow. And I was no longer in their rear view. I was the new horizon. I got lunch with Darius a few weeks later. It had become a kind of ritual, our post-launch debriefs. He always asked the same question halfway through the meal. Do you ever miss it? And every time, I gave him a different answer. This time I said, I miss believing they were better than they were. He nodded, solemn. It's hard, he said. Loyalty is only noble when it's mutual. We sat in silence after that. The good kind. The kind where no one needs to explain their scars. Where you just breathe, eat, and know you're sitting across from someone who understands the long game. When we parted, he said something that stayed with me. You didn't burn the bridge. You raised the water level until it vanished. That night, I opened my old journals, the ones I'd kept during those final months at the company. Pages of gaslighting, of meetings where I was asked to be more collaborative, of ideas stolen mid-sentence, of promotions handed to less capable voices with louder egos. I didn't read them to relive. I read them to remember what I survived. Because survival isn't just making it out. It's making something beautiful after. The final moment came quietly. No press release. No ribbon cutting. Just a small internal note from our comms team. As of this quarter, we've overtaken Sinera in market share across all 5 verticals. Sinera, my former employer. The name sat in the middle of that sentence like a ghost I hadn't spoken to in years. I stared at it for a long time, not with triumph, not even with closure, just acknowledgement. Because by now, their collapse didn't feel personal. It felt mathematical. The result of choices, repeated and unchecked. When you devalue people who create, you eventually run out of creation. I didn't toast with champagne. I didn't update my LinkedIn with numbers or milestones. I walked home, barefoot through the courtyard of our new campus, shoes in one hand, coffee in the other. The sun was setting, burning the edges of the buildings gold, and for the first time in a decade, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. Not for competitors, not for saboteurs, not for stolen credits. Just forward. That same night, I received a calendar invite I hadn't expected, from Catherine, the new CEO of Sinera. Subject line: if you ever want to come back, no body text, just the date, open-ended. I didn't delete it. I didn't respond. I left it there, pinned to the bottom of my inbox, as a reminder that some doors don't need to be slammed shut. They just need to be walked past. 2 weeks later, I sat on stage at a global innovation summit, panel title, Women Who Rewrote the System. I was the closing speaker. Not the first time I'd done this, but the first time it felt like the story no longer belonged to me alone. It belonged to every engineer who was told to wait, to every designer who watched her prototype get white-labeled under someone else's initials, to every woman who left quietly and rebuilt loudly. I stood at the podium, took a breath, and spoke the last line I would say that night. You don't win by being louder than the people who erase you. You win by being the reason they're forgotten. The room went still. Then came the applause. Long, rising, and then silence again. That elegant silence. The kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. The kind that follows someone who built her way out. Thank you all for listening to my story until the very end. I hope that, even just a little, what I've shared can bring something meaningful to you. Goodbye, and see you again